Hi, Misha here. And a week or two ago, I did a video looking at the ships of Star Trek Discovery. Well, at least a dozen of them I kind of picked out because we had recent news that Season 5 would be the final one. Some people makes them sad, some people they're relieved, some people don't care. At the same time, we've been looking at Star Trek Picard, Season 3, which we're about to have episode 6, so we're past the halfway point, or about to be. Seems to be getting quite good acclaim, attention, reviews. In episode 1 of that, though, in the 10 Ford lounge or bar, this was called the Fat One. And ironically, they were actually using Eagle Moss models. Unfortunately, last year Eagle Moss went away. Well, this past weekend, Master Replica's website went live, and the first 24 or so starships went up for sale. Now, there aren't any new ones yet. These are just new old stock that the new company obtained from purchasing what was left from Eagle Moss. I did actually order one. I didn't want to go more than that because I don't know the new company. It's shipping from overseas, but I needed one that they had to kind of finish my collection. So when that comes in, I'll do a video. What they did post for Star Trek was pretty random. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I'm sure they'll post more as time goes on. But I just checked the website before doing this video, and they're mostly out of stock. So I don't know if they're restocking or if they didn't really get that much inventory. So it's kind of the purpose of this video. I thought we would look back, out of respect for Star Trek Picard, at the Enterprise NCC-1701-D, the Fat One. But before we talk about the ship itself, let's revisit the shuttlecraft, the support craft that it had on board. Again, we're just hanging out, having fun, looking at die-cast models. I know we're kind of retreading old ground, but hopefully within the next couple of months we'll have brand new models to talk about. But hey, we're all sitting down to watch episode 6, so let's talk about it. Let's begin with the smallest craft on board a starship, maybe the most humble, but also, as the Titan showed us, the most important in a lot of ways. The CMU Cargo Management Unit, the Work Bee. We first saw these in the motion picture, and they have popped up here and there throughout Star Trek. And pretty much any ship or station of any size at all is going to have some. Yeah, they manage cargo, but they can also inspect, repair, just a small little craft. Now, this is a one-man craft, just over 3 meters long, depending on the attachment. And it has basically work manipulators, lights. Some can have tug-tow equipment on the back, manipulator arms. It can maintain an atmosphere for about 15 hours inside, but typically the occupant will be in a spacesuit or a pressure suit, and in that case it can operate for up to 3 days, although usually these would just be a few hours at most. They could do repairs. They could work as escape craft, although they're very short-ranged. They're not even impulse, they're thruster only. Again, you don't want a impulse craft darting around that close to the hull. That'd be a bad idea. And our little model here is from Eagle Moss, one of their shuttle packs. And it's actually pretty neat. It's one of the very first they ever did with a clear glass canopy. There's some basic seating inside. It's just a good background craft, and it's got some good heft and weight to it for what it is. And that's the small version. Over here we have one that came out in one of the more recent shuttle packs. This is the Sphinx Work Pod, also sometimes known as the M1A or M2A, depending on the exact variant. And this is based on the Work Bee, but it's a 2-seater. And it has, okay, let's just be honest, it's basically an El Camino in space. It's got a little sled in the back. These can operate as cargo tugs, pallet movers, and they're larger. They're a little over 6 meters, depending on the manipulators. They have little arms out here. And while this was designed early on in TNG, it was never seen on screen as such. It was just in paintings and concept art, that kind of thing. But it's entered into Star Trek lore, and now that we have an actual little model of one from Eagle Moss, it's part of it. This is a nice one. It's almost all metal, except for the top here and the glass here. But it's actually a good size and a good heft. More than you'd think. So yeah, these are work craft that the Galaxy class or any other starship would carry. Space stations, docks. And they're meant to operate only in space. They're not shielded. Not much of that. They're basically big space suits. And the next step up from there is the Type 15 Shuttle Pod. And this is not a whole lot bigger than a work bee. A little over 3.5 meters. It is at least impulse capable. These are impulse nacelles. You can see the hollow out areas in the back. So that's your engines, your thrusters there. Because every bit of space they have in the main body needs to go towards cargo and the person. Typically, these are operated by one person. They could sometimes have two. At most, they could hold 3. And they could carry a small amount of cargo. They were a short-range, light, shuttle-type craft. They had some basic shielding. By default, they weren't armed, but they could be fitted with 2 Type 4 phaser emitters, phaser arrays. Typically not for combat, more for work purposes, say busting up a rock, asteroid, that kind of thing. And yeah, these are not FTL capable. And you would want to be stuck in one for very long. But for a small short-range craft, they can go in and out of anywhere, fitting on the smallest ships and the smallest stations. It's a utility craft. They're inexpensive, easy to maintain. And the Enterprise would have at least 18 on board at any given time. So, quite a few, probably more, considering we had a total of 3 shuttle bays on the ship. I don't know why. I've always kind of had a little bit of a soft spot for the Type 15 here. We first see this in Season 2, I believe. And it's throughout the show here and there, but it's a very limited craft. As I was saying, the Galaxy has 3 shuttle bays. Shuttle Bay 1 is up here. And then Shuttles Bays 2 and 3 are down here. 1 being the largest on part of the saucer, and then 2 and 3 on the star drive. So, quite a bit of shuttle room experience. And moving up in the world of shuttles themselves. If I can get it out from under here. Kind of set it a little close, but oh well. We get the famous Type 6, the minivan in space. Now, this only officially appeared in Season 5. But, because of all good things, it was retroactively on the Enterprise from the very beginning, because we see Picard and Yaren 1 before the events encounter of Varport. And this is the next step up. This is classed as a medium range shuttle. It is about 6.5 meters long. Typically crewed by 2, and can support 4 and in pinches up to 6 passengers for relatively short voyage durations. It's one single cabin. It is capable of warp for the first time. Typically around warp 3 sustained, faster and shorter bursts. It does not have phasers as standard, but it can be fitted with 2 Type 4s if needed. It can carry more cargo. And it has a short-range transporter, basically for emergencies. Not really meant to be used a lot, but we do see it transporting 3 people in Best of Both Worlds Part 2. So, somewhat there. It does have shield generators. It's a roundly capable craft, not too big that it can't fit on smaller ships like, say, the Intrepid. But thanks to the warp drive and larger internal volume for cargo and people, it's just a more well-rounded shuttle. And it would effectively end up being the workhorse for the Enterprise. And it's actually a adaptation of the Galileo from Star Trek V. They basically took the TOS TMP era shuttle and shortened it and gave it newer looking nacelles to match the TNG aesthetic, and boom, there you go. And I remember having the Playmates version of this back in the 90s, which was pretty neat to scale. And that was kind of one of the benefits of this, as it was small enough they could actually have an actual prop on set that the actors could interact with, and it was boxy enough that they could make it out of wood and styrofoam and whatever else materials, and it'd be practical. And that was actually important because its predecessor wasn't quite so fortunate. The Type 7, considered a long-range medium shuttle. It was designed in Season 1 to kind of match the rounded, at the time, futuristic styling of the Galaxy class itself. Kind of bubbly, bigger, what have you. So that was great in concept. And the studio model for the ship for space shots would work fine. Unfortunately, what they ran into, this really couldn't be rendered on screen. Part of it was the size. This is about 8.5 meters, so it's bigger. But a part of it is it's just too rounded in every way, and you couldn't really make this out of wood and other kind of inexpensive straight-edge materials. To make something like this with the technology of the 80s on a TV budget would have been difficult. So we ended up with some rather awkward scenes. However, this was the large all-purpose shuttle through seasons 3 and 4 for the most part, and they made do with it. But anyway, in universe, like I said, it's 8.5 meters, crew of 2, 6 passengers, more in a pinch. But instead of holding a lot of people, it's really meant for long range. For one, it has a sustained warp of at least 4, which is pretty good for this era. Standard shielding, and it can be fitted with Type 5 phaser emitters if necessary, so a little more powerful. But it has internal bulkheads, and they can be moved and configured. So basically, you can have a crew compartment or medical compartment plus the pilot's compartment, so you can kind of set up the interior to give some basic privacy for diplomacy, what have you. These could have rudimentary bunk rooms. They usually had a replicator as a standard piece of kit. They had a medium range transporter, more of a standard style transporter versus emergency. Just more comfortable for longer duration missions, voyages. All around, something that folks would find a better thing. So we see these being taken on like conferences and other long range missions. But they are a little bigger, meaning the Enterprise could only carry a handful of these under standard configuration. Maybe, say, 6. 2 in each bay. Neat concept, but yeah, you don't really hear much about the Type 7 now. And you definitely don't hear about our final shuttle. The Type 9A. And I was really surprised they did this in Eagle Moss, because this, I remember being in the old tech manuals, even in the early 90s, but we never really see it on screen, although it is referenced being used by the USS Titan in the 2380s microship. And basically, this is a larger cargo version of a Type 6. If the Type 6 is the minivan, well, this is the full-size station wagon. It is about 10.5 meters long. Some sources say 9.5. You get the idea. Bigger anyway. And the standard version can carry about 6.5 tons of cargo, but some adapted, uprated versions can carry nearly 9 tons of cargo. Now, you usually just had a crew of 2, plus maybe a third member that was more of a cargo manager. And it was capable of about warp 2.5 sustained. It could be armed with Type 5 phasers if necessary. It had shielding. Pretty standard. It was designed to work in atmosphere, also to work on construction sites like Utopia Planitia, because it had a bulkhead. There was the front compartment for the crew, and then there was this rear compartment that was designed to, if necessary, to be opened out into space, for cargo. Pretty neat. It was also designed where it could actually carry one of these. There was just enough room in the back for a Sphinx pod, so it could deploy these. Again, this is a thruster-only craft, so yeah, kind of deliver one, because this, of course, is full impulse and warp capable, so it could carry that. There was also a variant we saw during the Dominion War called the Type 9B that was somewhat more armored and had the phasers as standard, and the compartment was turned into basically a crew compartment that could carry up to 40 Space Marines, Federation Marines. And so it was used as a landing craft for Marines or boarding craft in some instances. And it was slightly adapted from this one here, mostly by giving them seats. The model here, because it's so long, is actually a little bit thinner than you'd think, but I really think it's cool. It's actually one of my favorites. I really like it when they do background ships. And, yeah, I didn't think I would like the shuttles before getting the shuttle packs, but as it turns out, no, I do like them. But because the Type 9A is so long, typically the Galaxy class would only carry one. And about the smallest ship that would routinely carry these would be like a Nebula, but they were very popular with work sites, stations, and what have you. So here we have kind of the 4 types: very small, light, short range, a light, medium range, then just kind of long range, medium, and then this is classed as a heavy range, heavy cargo long range shuttle. So it kind of gives you all the options for the good old D here. Even though transporters were very, very common and the ship had several transporter rooms, yeah, it still needed to rely on shuttlecraft for any number of reasons. So with no further ado, let's talk about the fat one. You didn't think we'd avoid the spinny thingy altogether, did you? Of course not, but it just wasn't really practical. Plus, I like handling little shuttles. So here we are. The Galaxy Class Enterprise D. And this is the XL model from Eagle Moss. And these XLs are quite nice. They were big enough to be bigger, but not so huge that they were hard to find a space for on the shelf. And this one's pretty heavy. The saucer is the metal part. The star drive is mostly plastic or ABS. And it does have some clear stuff for the nacelles and the deflector dish. So, the Galaxy class in general. This was Starfleet's next great leap forward. They were pretty much stuck in the TMP era design styling from the late 23rd century into the early 24th. You do have a bit of a transitional period with the Ambassador class and the Niagara, but they still owe a lot to the previous generation. They were trying out new computer and control systems, but if you look at the bridge, it's still very TMP. Well, this was designed to change all of that. Work began in the 2330s, 2340s, looking at new technology, new research. And the very first ship, the class name, the USS Galaxy, was commissioned, or at least launched, in 2357. Now, when a naval ship is launched from the slipway, from the dock, it still has to go through fitting out and trials and all that. So it would take a number of years for this brand new behemoth of a ship to be ready. And its two sister ships, the USS Yamato and the USS Enterprise, would soon launch, with the Enterprise being commissioned in 2363 and sent on its first deep space assignment in 2364, which is where we pick up with the Next Generation. Unlike TOS, which just kind of drops us in the middle of the 5-year voyage, we actually do get a true pilot. Unfortunately, we also see very early on the USS Yamato being destroyed in Season 2. They thought it was a glitch in the systems, because again, all brand new. Turns out it was alien interference. Damn Iconians. But they didn't know it at the time. We never see the USS Galaxy, but we see other ships. The USS Challenger is in a very neat cameo with Geordi LaForge in Voyager's 100th episode, Season 5 of that show. We also see the USS Odyssey at the beginning of Season 3 of Deep Space Nine, with the whole Dominion arc, and the Odyssey doesn't have such a great fate. We see a few others here and there, and there's a few unnamed ones, like the Admiral ship at Best of Both, the Battle of Wolf 359, Best of Both Worlds. But originally they were going to create 6 of these because they were large and expensive. We know by at least the time of the Dominion War they would build at least a dozen, and chances are many more. But let's start off by talking tech specs, because I love tech specs. Hope you do too. And for that, let's take her off the stand. I will give credit. With the standard version or this version, the stand is one of the most secure in the whole Eagle Moss line. It clips in the back and actually kind of hugs the star drive, and it's just very well balanced. So, the ship. Giving it a very different look, very 80s. It's quite wide, quite ovular. Overall length is 642 meters. And I think to some that doesn't sound huge. It's huge. The original Enterprise was just under 300 meters, and the refit was just over 300 meters, give or take. Sources argue a little bit. But yeah, it was more than twice the length of the TOS Enterprise, but more importantly, it's quite a bit wider. It also has a total of 42 decks. At the bottom being here, but then a lot of those being in this here saucer. That's a lot of space. So when you say it has a crew of over 1,000 to standard, 1,014, 1,024, that might sound large, but keep in mind the original Constitution had a crew of 400 to 450 and a ship much smaller with much less internal volume. And that's why in TOS they look crammed in, at least in Season 1. By Season 3, TOS is looking a little thin on the ground because extras cost money. With the Next Generation, while there are extras, the corridors often look empty or just a few folks. And that's logical because, while there's a lot of stuff on this ship, there's a lot of empty space. And to be fair, a good chunk of the ship was essentially empty, unfinished when it was launched. That was by design so they could configure it as needed. Maybe more science labs, maybe more cargo holds, maybe more crew quarters. It was kind of configurable to some extent. And this was the first series we saw things like replicators on. And while we had the transporter in TOS, this was the first time we saw multiple transporters all throughout the ship, and also industrial or cargo transporters. Like I said, we have 3 shuttle bays. We've got a large one up here on the saucer, and then we have 2 smaller ones down here on the star drive. They're still quite large, but smaller. We have nacelles, This was capable of going up to warp 9.3 sustained, although cruise is more like warp 6 or 7. And it could reach warp 9.6, but for only a few hours. Beyond that, you were risking permanent damage. Of course, it was capable of full impulse. There is a impulse drive here on the star drive again, and then 2 drives on the saucer here and here, so a total of 3 arrays, although this seems to be the main one down here. Of course, we have a primary deflector. Deflectors have come a long way since they basically look like a satellite dish. The main bridge is on deck 1, where it's traditional, not necessarily logical, but traditional. Something new from the original series, we now have a ready room, we have a conference room, and the bridge is much larger, carpeted, and science stations, you know the deal. The one thing I never understood is, why does the tactical officer have to stand? I could understand maybe in a life or this standing there all day. You ever tried to stand all day? Sucks. Yeah. It had 2 turbo lifts, although it's often said that one of them was usually dedicated specifically to go to the battle bridge, which is down in the star drive. Now, I find it really odd that of all the ships Eagle Moss did, they either didn't do a saucer separating galaxy, or, knowing Eagle Moss, they didn't do a set with a separated saucer and galaxy and star drive, because the idea was up here was all your science labs and the S families, which was a Gene Roddenberry idea that was pretty silly. But the idea was they could shed that, and then this would be relatively well armed for combat. For various technical reasons, and just because, frankly, yeah, we didn't really see it happen much. It happened a couple of times in Season 1. Of course, we see it in Best of Both Worlds, and then after that, we don't see it again until, well, the warp drive blows up in Generations. Because for all the powerful shields, this was a bit of a glass cannon. It seemed to have some, I don't know, warp core breach or rupture was a seemingly common problem with the Galaxy class. Oh well. On the other hand, it had new fancy phaser strips that ran around the saucer and back here. All these little bumps are escape pods, so at least they knew that. Although, in cause and effect, they never have time to get to them. For all the phasers it has, though, there's actually only 2 photon tubes officially, although most people agree they must be able to launch multiple torpedoes at once. There's one up here on the gooseneck, and there's one in the very back, and that's it. And the saucer, while it could be detached from the star drive at warp, I think up to about warp 7 was safe, actually was not capable of warp on its own, although it did have a warp bubble sustainer, so it would kind of slowly lose momentum. You'd think for a life craft, but oh well. Still neat. And opposite the bridge, on the other side, we have something that, while it was planned from the very beginning of the show, we never got to see, except in concepts and tech guides. But luckily, Eagle Moss did make us Callisto. And that is, of course, our last little ship here. This came in one of our last shuttle packs. This is the Captain Jot. Really a shame we never got to see this in the show at all. We saw its successor in Insurrection, and we actually got that one in the standard Eagle Moss series, but I guess because this did not appear except as a concept, we had to wait to the shuttle pack. But again, they did a very good job. It also very much looks like a UFO. Kind of want to put it out there chasing one of my FA-18s. So, like the saucer section, this is not warp capable. But it did have a sustainer, and it could be dropped off at Warp 7. Now, this was more of a diplomatic... It's basically a mobile building. It was not armed, although it did have shielding. And it was definitely designed for atmospheric flight. It also had landing structures, landing feet. And it was actually designed to, land on a planet and kind of be in place as a conference center. It had multiple entrances and egresses. It had a full equipped transporter room. It actually was 2 full decks and had an operational crew of 4, although 2 could do it. And it could easily accommodate 4 VIP passengers or more if they don't mind bunking. It had somewhat private crew quarters. It had a galley, a kitchen, a dining area. Nothing too fancy, but it did. And it had a conference area. Some sources say 2. Like I said, it is 2 decks, and it's a pretty good size. It's about 23 meters by 41 meters. So, yeah, that's not insignificant. And since that's doubled up at least partially, there's a lot of internal volume. It can also serve as a cargo transport, a freighter. Say maybe if you wanted to have a mobile medical center, you could send it down with lots of vaccines and treat people on it. Just a multi-role craft meant for more peaceful operations and to go from the planet to the ship and ship to the planet. You could also drop it off at the edge of a star system, and you could use its warp sustainers to make it to planetfall, but then when it needed to be picked up. The only downside, it wasn't armed at all, so you better hope wherever it was going it was safe. But it would have been kind of neat to see the captain's yacht. The top here is metal, the legs are plastic, so it's got some good weight to it, good heft. And it's about the goodest we get. I remember having a model of the Enterprise D when I was younger, teenager, early 20s, and it actually had a removable captain's yacht. So that's the first time I had it, but neat to have it here as well. So of course this had at least 2 sick bays, 1 in the saucer, 1 in the star drive. Pretty much everything had to be doubled because of the separable things. The battle bridge, in reality, was actually a redressed TMP era bridge set. It's kind of neat. It had hydroponics. Of course, it had cetaceans operations. Something else that would have been neat to see on the show. Of course, it had classrooms, which is pretty silly. Less silly, it had a shooting range, a firing range. Of course, it also had Tin Ford. The real one, not the one in California from Picard. That was a neat set. A lot of good conversations happened on that set in the show. We saw cargo bay sets. Of course, engineering was a prominent set. It actually spanned multiple decks, with the warp core running a good chunk vertically in the star drive. Fun fact, earlier warp cores, like we see in Enterprise and even TOS, were horizontal. That was one of the several updates that happened in the late 23rd century, was the vertical warp core, which was supposed to be better, because why not? And, of course, holodecks. And Barclay. Did I say more? Holodecks. What a concept. When you see it in a counter at Farpoint, it was pretty, I don't say believable, but you understood. It had limitations. It had walls. Then you look at holodecks from, say, Voyager, and you're just having fun with it. It's all fiction at that point. But at least the holodeck started off as something that was supposed to be based at least in physics and kind of became just this magic room. But hey, why not? And there's enough people on board that you could pay someone to clean the floors of the holodeck up afterwards, too. And we could go on and on. After all, we saw this ship for 7 seasons of a show. And that was back when a season was 26, at least 22 episodes. And we saw it in a feature-length film, so saw a lot of it. Well, you did. I heard a lot of it. And I like its little support craft. But we'll, call it good here. A little primer, just kind of looking back at the D. even though the TOS Enterprise, the original 1701, is so famous, keep in mind that show was on the air only 3 seasons, and we never saw the ship again. It was replaced with the TMP refit, which I admit is a much more attractive ship, but still, this ship got a lot more screen time than really any other Enterprise to date. Maybe in the future we'll get more, but the B, we barely knew her. The C got a little more time, but still was only in an episode. And the E, well, it got 3 movies, but that's about it. And of course the F, and now the upcoming G, who knows? Of course, there's always the Enterprise J, everyone's favorite. Yeah, and I would agree with the assertion that this looked a lot like the Hilton in space. It was a little too comfortable, a little too 80s, but that was kind of part of the subplot, even if it was unintended, about the Next Generation. The couple of first seasons, they really didn't have any challenges. The Romulans were at first off doing their thing. The Ferengi turned out to be not the threat they thought they'd be. The Klingons were allies. And of course, then we meet the Borg, and then we meet the Dominion. And then we see ships change. But for a minute, this was the golden age of exploration. This was classed more as an exploratory ship than a medium or a heavy cruiser, I should say. Later, we started to see the cruiser designations and frigates and whatnot come back. And there, of course, are a whole family of ships based on it. The Wolf 359, Kit Bash fleet. But this was kind of the crown jewel of a whole ship design, whole lineage. But after the rough events of the late 2360s, the Defiant and similar ships would kind of take shape, and you get things like the Prometheus. So it was a brief era, kind of a, Pax Galactica for them. And they never made these in huge numbers just because they were hugely expensive and inefficient. It was a bit of a, pure hubris. Yeah, pure fucking hubris. But still, it goes to show you. And it's interesting to see where things are at, and to see if we'll get a Galaxy class, the Enterprise saucer maybe, or not, in Picard Season 3 before it's over. Well, it's their turn to find out, huh? I like the E a lot. It's definitely a more cinematic ship. But the D feels like home. It is a comfortable ship, a large. And it also does project that like multi-year mission thing. Everything you need's right on board. At least they never had to worry about running out of dilithium like they did in TOS, huh? So what do you think? What's your favorite Enterprise? What do you think of Next Generation, really? For being completely honest, what do you think? It's hit and miss, honest to God. With so many episodes, it doesn't have to always be a hit, and with over 24 a year for 7 years, yeah, there are going to be some duds, but, the good definitely outweighs the bad, in my opinion. And I actually really like the fleet that this is, spawned. The Springfield, the Cheyenne, yeah, things like that. But yeah, with everything going on, with the Master Replica website going online, with Picard Season 3 finally being a success, I just felt like revisiting it. So, hope you enjoyed hanging out, kind of just low-key, having fun. Appreciate you staying with me. If you could, please like, share, subscribe, and please do comment. Let me know what you think. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.